Colossians 1:15-20 says this. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created, that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things consist. And he is the head of the body, the church, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in all things he may have preeminence. For it pleased the Father that in him all the fullness should dwell, and by him to reconcile all things to himself. By him, whether things on earth or things in heaven, having made peace through the blood of his cross. It's Colossians 1:15-20, and I want to read it one more time. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created, that in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things consist. And he is the head of the body, the church, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in all things he may have the preeminence. For it pleased the Father that in him all the fullness should dwell, and by him to reconcile all things to himself. By him, whether things on earth or things in heaven, having made peace through the blood of his cross. And Tozer, A.W. Tozer, he said once that he wasn't a great speaker, but he spoke about things that really mattered. And I think that the thing that matters the most is the cross of Jesus. It's the message of his death and resurrection. That is the thing that matters the most. The cross was the climax of this cosmic battle between good and evil. It is the moment in which God has victory over all powers, over all authority, over every system on earth, over every power that is invisible to us, and over our own hearts. Victory. Victory over our own heart. That is the power of the message of the cross. It is a subversive power, because it comes against the other powers and it subverts them. It turns them upside down. It disarms the enemy. It takes away the enemy's power. It takes away the power of sin in our own hearts. It destroys it. That is the power of the message of the cross. And we live in a world spinning in turmoil, in war, in chaos. We live in a culture, like we've been talking about these days, of a mindset, of a worldview that is contrary to what we believe, contrary to what we follow, to the Lord that we follow. And it sometimes is hard to stay true to that. And it is in that context that we need to stay strong in the truth of the message of the power of the cross. And to believe that Jesus is over all. That he has authority over all, that he is greater than anything that you and I are going to face when we go out from here today. Whether it be in our own hearts, in our own lives, or whether it be the opposition we face as we serve him, doing the things that he has called us to do. He is over and above all those things. And I want to look at this passage, but actually read another passage from chapter 2 going on, because this letter of Paul to the Colossians is a context where Paul is calling the Colossians back to Jesus. He's saying to them, you need to have an exclusive faith in Jesus. Because a lot of other ideas and philosophies were coming into the church and were confusing, and people were trusting in other things and looking to other messages. And he's saying, come back to Jesus, because he's enough for you. He's sufficient for you. He is above all these other things, so that he is all you need. God is in him. Everything, the fullness of life is in him. You don't need anything else. So he's reminding them, he's saying, come back to that sole focus of Jesus, of the message of his sacrifice and of the power of his resurrection that gives you life. He says, come back to that and remember the victory that he has had over those things. So I want to read the next passage, which is in chapter 2 of Colossians. Going forward a little bit in Colossians chapter 2, verses 9 to 15, and that's where we'll focus to this morning. So Colossians 2, 9 to 15. For in him dwells all the fullness of the Godhead bodily. And you are complete in him, who is the head of all principality and power. In him you were also circumcised, with the circumcision made without hands, by putting off the body of the sins of the flesh, by the circumcision of Christ, buried with him in baptism, in which you also were raised with him through faith in the working of God, who raised him from the dead. And you, being dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, he has made alive together with him, having forgiven you all trespasses, having wiped out the handwriting of requirements that was against us, which was contrary to us, and he has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the cross. Having disarmed principalities and powers, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them in it. In verse 9, Paul says to them, Jesus is all you need. He is sufficient for you. You don't need anything else. And he includes us in his victory. He says, I have victory over all, and you're with me in this. You are victorious with me. When I defeated death, you defeat death with me. Verse 11, it talks about circumcision. The circumcision was that mark on the people of God that set them aside, that purified them. He says, you are mine, you're my people. I mark you with circumcision because you are mine. And then Paul says to the Greek followers and to the Gentiles, and he says, you too are his, because at the cross you were circumcised with a circumcision that is not made by hands, but it is in the heart. He says, you are purified. At the cross, you are purified. You are made his, because Jesus has victory over your heart, over your sin at the cross. In verse 12, it reminds us, he says, because we died with him. It's not something that you just, it's just for everybody. It's just out there. It's just, everybody's cool. It's not universalism. He's saying at the cross this was done. And as you choose to follow me, to carry your cross, to die with me, you too have victory. And you too raised from the dead, and you too have life. And the baptism being the symbol of that, as we go into the water and we die and we come out of the water alive. We are alive in Jesus. Verse 13 and 14. We receive forgiveness. We receive forgiveness from him. This is what he means when he says putting off the body of sin, that weird sentence, and I want to go into that. What does he mean by that? But he says you've taken off the body of sin. You are free from the oppression of the sin in your own heart. You are forgiven. And so he's talking about victory over our own hearts, but the last verse, verse 15, he says there is victory over the powers and the principalities. And if you remember the first passage that I read in Colossians 1, it says that Jesus had authority over all powers and principalities, visible and invisible. And then in this passage he goes on and he says he has defeated, he has disarmed those principalities and those powers, visible and invisible. So I want to focus down now on just one expression in this whole passage. And it's used twice. Similar expressions in the original. It's used twice. He says, put off the body of sin. Put off the body of sin. Destroy the body of sin. And he says, disarm the principalities and powers. It's a similar word. And I'm going to use the same word for both in English. Disarm. Disarm the body of sin. Disarm the principalities and powers. What does that mean, to disarm something? To put off something? It's like you're wearing dirty old clothes and you say, I'm tired of this, and you rip it off, you take it off, you throw it away, you want new clothes, you want new life, you want a new body. To disarm, there's an enemy, he's powerful, he is armed, he has weapons. You disarm him, you take that power away, that authority is destroyed. It's like a dictator who is oppressing a people, who is overturned, who is publicly humiliated, who is brought before the people and said, he has no more power over you. He is disarmed. He has no more authority. That is to disarm. To take away the power. It is to subvert. It is to turn things upside down. The cross is the most subversive act in history. What does it mean, subversive? It means to turn things upside down. It means that what was dead becomes alive. What was wrong is forgiven. The oppressed are set free. The last will be first. And where there is war and destruction, there is peace. And where there is pain, there will be joy. That is subversion. It is to challenge and to take away the power. There's a woman in Burma that I followed a little bit because I find her to be a really cool example of subversion. Her name's Aung San Suu Kyi. And there's a film about her, pretty cool, it's called The Lady. And she fought for democracy in a country that had military oppression. And she went and did political rallies to try to seek for a democratic vote. And yet the military would stand up against her every time. And in fact, her father was shot by the military when she was a little girl. So she's up against this power. The same power that murdered her father. And she believes in her country. She wants to see a democratic vote. And so she's on these political rallies. And there's one particular moment when they're on a rally and the soldiers came and they stood before her party and they were armed. They had guns pointing straight at her team, straight at her people. And her team say, let's go, we don't want violence, let's go. And she goes, wait here. And she walks straight at them. She has no weapon, she is unarmed, she has nothing. She walks straight at them, and she walks straight past them and straight through them. And the general has his weapon pointed at her, and he says, go, stand back, go away, I'm going to shoot. And he counts 1, 2, and when he's about to shoot, the other general from the car stands and says, stop, let's go. And the army just leaves. The effect that had on the people was incredible. Because suddenly, the all-powerful enemy, the armed enemy, was humiliated publicly. The power was taken away. And that's just a silly human example of what subversion is and what the cross did. In the universe, in that cosmic realm, what Jesus did at the cross, by surrendering himself, by giving himself and disarming the powers, visible and invisible. Disarming the powers. So I want to just go through, what do we mean by these powers? When it says he disarmed the principalities and powers in verse 15, what does it mean? Well, first of all, invisible powers. We live in a reality of a physical world and a spiritual world. In Ephesians 6:12 it says, we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness. We have an enemy. The Bible says we have an enemy, and that enemy is Satan, the devil, who tempts us, a spiritual world that affects us. In 1 Peter 5:8 it says, be sober, be vigilant, because your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he could devour. It says it affects us. It says there is an enemy. But Jesus teaches that the devil is the father of lies. That his number one weapon is to lie. to cheat us, to trick us. And if we're not aware of that, if we don't realize the spiritual battle that we're in, then we are vulnerable to that. We can be attacked by that, and we can be unaware of the attacks of the enemy on our lives. So he can use lies, and he can tell you things like, you're a failure. You can't change. He can tell you that you need more stuff. You need security. You don't have enough. He can tell you that no one likes you. He can tell you that you can never change the things in your life that are destroying you. He can use those lies. And if I'm not aware, if we are not aware, we cannot stand up against them. And if we're not aware, then we can cower back in fear. The other day we were sharing here about that incident in Zurich and the riot. And Luke said, and I agree with him, one of the things that helped us as a team was being aware of the spiritual battle that we were in. Realizing that it was real. The fact that God spoke to us the day before, the night before, and said, be ready, be vigilant, through that exact verse. Be vigilant, be sober. The enemy is around like a lion, roaring, seeking whom to devour. Be ready. So then when we faced it and stuff was happening, immediately you're looking at each other and saying, wow, didn't we talk about this morning? And then when we got back to the house, we were going, man, God just supernaturally protected us. And He prepared us for it. So that even if things had gone wrong, even if we had got seriously hurt or whatever it was, God warned us and we knew and we were ready. God was in control. He knew what was happening and He warned us. We were aware of that spiritual battle that we face when we serve Him in the mission He's called us to. At the cross, Jesus comes against this enemy. At the cross, He destroys the power of the enemy. In an epic battle where the devil, blind by his pride, thinks that he's having victory by destroying the Christ, he at that exact moment is delivering God's victory by making God the sacrifice, by God coming and suffering with man, taking evil on Himself and taking it to the cross and destroying it. So the devil thinks he's having victory, and at the same time, he's losing everything. Because Jesus is defeating death on the cross. At the cross, Jesus exposes the devil. He unmasks the lies of the devil. At the cross, He shows the true evil and true rebellion of the enemy, and He destroys it. The enemy uses lies to destroy us, and Jesus uses truth to set us free. The enemy uses violence to pull us down, and Jesus uses love and forgiveness to turn everything upside down and inside out and to change everything. The invisible powers were destroyed at the cross. The visible powers, the human, political, economic, religious, social, cultural, ideological powers of our time. The powers and principalities that rule this world. The funny thing, the interesting thing to realize is that these things are part of God's creation. It says in the first chapter that those powers and those principalities were created by Jesus. And they're part of creation. So they were supposed to be good. They were supposed to be something that blessed us, that served us. And yet they've become our idols. It's become what oppresses us. It's become what enslaves us.
That's good.
But Jesus lived in this system. He was part of this culture. He walked with us. But He didn't bow down to it. He didn't bow down to the idol of culture, of human systems, of human politics, of the human economic system. He didn't bow down to it. He challenged it. He changed it. He transformed it. He defeated it at the cross. Jesus taught that he who leads should serve. That he who wants to be first should be last. He subverted the system. He turned it inside out. And he died because of it. Because he challenged that system. He lived in a time where he's facing the Jewish system, the Jewish culture, the Jewish religious system that is so proud of its morality. And yet he preached a morality higher than theirs and lived a higher morality than they ever preached. And then at the cross, he shows how much it lacked morality and truth and God. As they deny God as their king and they deny the very Messiah they were waiting for, he subverts that system. Jesus lived in a time where the Roman system, with its proud, its pride of its unity and its justice system. And then at the cross, Jesus destroys and subverts that by proving the lack of unity and justice. But how he set up a community more unified and more just than that. And at the cross, an innocent man is put to death in a trial flawed with corruption. He destroys, he subverts a system that looks so great. So he takes those systems and those things, those human things that we make that look so great, that we think are so absolute, that we think are so right, and he unmasks it at the cross and he says it's nothing. We live in a time where we're told all these things contrary to our faith, and it's like, this is how you should think. This is the mindset you should follow. This is what's cool right now. This is how we're supposed to live. Not what you follow, not what you believe. The cross unmasks that ideology, that culture, that human system. At the cross, Jesus defeated the visible powers. And last of all, at the cross, Jesus defeated my own heart and your own heart, the sin that controls and oppresses us. He destroyed at the cross. Because our hearts do the same thing. In our hearts, we want to be God. We want to be in control. We think we're self-sufficient. We think we can do it. And we hurt other people through our selfishness. We don't want to do it, but it happens, We try to be good husbands, good fathers, and we mess up. We try to be good friends, and we mess up. Our selfishness, and then it leads to the world we live in, the war, the destruction, the poverty, the famine. We need to perceive and realize the reality of our humanity, of our sinfulness. And as we realize it, we bring it to the cross. Because our normal reaction, our natural reaction is to ignore it or to try to forget it. That's what I do a lot. It's like, something bad happened. I'll just keep going, That's not what Jesus does. Faces it full on. Takes it to the cross. Says, this is wrong. Unmasks it. This is wrong. I take it to the cross and I forgive. Forgiveness. Through the cross, through the forgiveness of the cross, he subverts the power of the sin in our hearts. Cross is the power of God. It's the power of God against the visible and invisible powers of this world. We were going to do a show once with a band in Brazil. I shared this story sometimes, so maybe you've heard it already, but it was just a moment that God showed me the power of the cross and what it means. I had a dream the night before. It's kind of weird. I'm not a very charismatic Pentecostal person, but God seemed to speak to me through dreams, and I received that. So I had this dream the night before of our show, and this band was playing. It was the band that we were going to play with, and in my dream, it was really weird. It was like this spiritual thing was going on. Like there's this vibe. It was very kind of, Eastern religion type, and everybody's kind of levitating in the dream, and the other band was preaching their message, a message of feel good. We are able, we can, it's humanism. It's like, you don't need God, you don't need Jesus, we can do this. If we just keep trying, we'll be great people, we'll, change the world. This is us, we're amazing. And everyone in this dream is going, yeah, preach it. It's like this spiritual weird thing. And I woke up with an intense fear. God, how can I go to this show tomorrow with this band that everybody follows? It's like well known and has a message so contrary to our message. How can I speak up in this show? How can I preach the message of your death and resurrection in this context, in this environment? And when we went to the show, the band did preach, before us. They got up there. They're not Christians, but they preached their message. You know what he said on the stage before we got up? I know there are people here that want to stand under a flag of a political party or of a religion. They want to preach a religion to you. But I want to tell you, believe in whatever you want. Just keep trying. If we fight together, we will change the world. And everybody's like, yeah. I knew he was talking about us. We stood up on that stage, we prayed together before as a band. I said, let's pray that God would speak to them today. those guys would know him today. We did our show, and at the end we preached, if you want to see change, if you want to have life, you need to know Jesus. You need to surrender to him. We're not great. We make mistakes. We're full of sin. We need Jesus. If you want to know Jesus, come to this side of the stage. Went over to the side of the stage, a crowd of people, and the front three guys, singer, guitar player, bass player of that band, standing right there. They prayed with us, and when we finished, you know what the singer said to me? Ben was there too. He said, I've been seeking for a long time, and I found it today. The cross is the power of God. It subverts the ideology of this world, and it brings hope and truth and life to our hearts. It changes our hearts. The missionary, we have a missionary in Chile, Coque. You probably have all heard the story. When he came to Jesus, he was shaking in the show. He was translating the message into Spanish. He didn't know what was going on, and we said, it's the power of God. The next day he came to church with us. He's this heavy metal guy. He's never been to church. He goes to church. And David gives a message and he says, if you want to know Jesus, come up front. He's the first to come up. He kneels down and he starts praying. And we gather around him to pray. And do you know what he says? I feel like there's some hand coming into my chest and pulling stuff out of me. What is going on? And he's crying. That is the power of the cross. The body of sin is being pulled out of you. You are receiving the inner transformation of the power of the cross in your life. Because only the cross can change my heart. Nothing else can change my heart. Only the message of the cross can change my heart. The cross is the power of God. It begins in my heart and it changes the world around me. It changes everything. It changes the spiritual reality around me. It brings life where there was death. It brings joy where there was pain. It brings peace where there was destruction. It subverts all things. At the cross, the devil and his lies are defeated. At the cross, this system is destroyed. Every time we preach the cross, the lies are unmasked. Hearts are changed. The ideological, cultural, political, economical systems of our world are subverted every time we preach the cross. So my prayer this morning is that, as a mission, we would let this power work through us. We would surrender to that power. That we would walk out here with our identity solid on the message of the cross of Jesus. That when we go and face our struggles and our challenges in the mission, in the ministry, that we would know that the cross is the power of God. When we face the struggles in our personal life and we know that our hearts need to be changed, that we would look to the cross.